Now for today's program. Dr. Arie W. Kruglanski is a distinguished university professor at the University of Maryland College Park. He directs a lab that studies human motivation as it affects thinking, feeling, and behavior. Professor Kruglanski's work has been cited more than 50,000 times and has been featured in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and many other publications. His theoretical work has been published in many journals. Professor Kruglanski has authored or co-authored 5 books, including The Three Pillars of Radicalization, Needs, Narratives, and Networks, The Radical's Journey, How German Neo-Nazis Voyaged to the Edge and Back, and his latest book, written with Dan Raviv, The Quest for Significance, Harnessing the Need That Makes the World Go Round. Professor Kruglanski is a recipient of numerous scientific awards and was recently honored with a lifetime of work by the American Psychological Association and the American Psychological Society. Joining Professor Kruglanski today is Moment contributor Dan Raviv. Dan was a CBS News correspondent for more than 40 years, covering stories all around the world, while writing books mostly about Israel's intelligence agencies. He is the host of the podcast, The Mossad Files. Dan is the co-author of the book and podcast, The Quest for Significance, with Professor Arie Kruglanski. Please welcome Dr. Arie Kruglanski and Dan Raviv.
Suzanne, thank you very much. So I'm Dan Raviv. Dr. Arie Kruglanski is joining me. And what an honor it was, Arie, to write this book with you, The Quest for Significance, because as you know, Arie, I knew almost nothing about this. I didn't study social psychology, but I thought maybe as a, shall we say, older man, I was ready to tackle it and understand it. So
The
was I
pleasure
okay?
with you.
Was I okay as a student?
It was fantastic experience, and you contributed so much from your life experience as a correspondent that met all the greats of the world and interviewed them and learned a lot.
Well, it's so fascinating to know that this human motivation, this craving for significance, has driven behaviors uh, which most people would call good or bad. What we mean, philanthropists, terrorists, all sorts of people. And just a week ago, it was terrible. In Washington, D.C., in our town, a double murder outside the Capitol Jewish Museum. Obviously, a lovely young couple, Sarah Milgram and Yaron Leshinsky, were killed. And according to the police, the killer is a man who came from Chicago, as far as we know, just to do that, to find a Jewish event, to kill 2 people just outside the Capitol Jewish Museum, and then shouting, free, free Palestine, as though, oh, so we have the motive. Now, I realize as a social psychologist, you're not a clinical psychologist. You never had this man, on the couch next to you. It's not that. But I know you have found in your decades of experience that when it comes to, say, murders, and in this case, I'd have to call it a political and an anti-Semitic murder, it can be explained most likely by a significance issue. Tell us how that could be.
Well, in this tragic event, there are 3 questions. One question is the question of motive. Why did he do it? The other question is, why did he choose to satisfy that motive by violence? And the third question is, why did he choose to satisfy this motive violently against a Jewish couple? Let me first unpack for you the question of motivation. When people talk about motivation in the media, in the newspapers, why did he do it? Why a mass shooting occurred? What was the motive? People tend to confuse ends and means. We could ask, why did he do it? He did it because he hated the Jewish people. Or we can say that he wanted to support the Palestinian cause. Or we wanted to say, we can say he was disgruntled. But these are all, from a psychological standpoint, unsatisfactory responses. Because from the psychological perspective, everything that we do goes down to some basic needs that we have. All the goals, all the multiplicity, infinitude of goals goes to basic needs. And the need in this case was this person's need to matter, to be somebody, to have a name for himself. This is the most pervasive, the most basic, the most fundamental human motivation that all of us have. And it can be satisfied in a variety of ways. So the question is, why was it satisfied in this case by violence? And the unfortunate thing is that violence and putting down other people in general is a primordial means to lift yourself up, to attain significance, to attain dominance. That's the way it happens in the animal world. That's the way it's settled between little children. That's the way sophisticated nations strive for their place in the international pecking order, by having the nuclear arsenal, having the stick that can unleash violence. And therefore, this is a tragedy of humanity, that the primordial, most accessible, most salient ways of putting yourself up, elevating yourself, is by putting somebody down through violence, which is the ultimate put down, eradication, elimination, reducing them to nothingness.
And in our discussion later, we'll show how that even applies to nations and why they might go to war or why the dictator would want to do so. But again, at this personal level, I mean, obviously, the man's defense attorney will come up with a story, and it could be about something bad in his life that drove him. There are stories in our legal system. But of course, you're trying to develop an understanding. And if I believe it, we wrote in our book, in The Quest for Significance, about research that you and your teams have done over the years, even to find out about terrorists, someone who was willing to strap on explosives and blow himself up, usually a man, blow himself up for a cause. But it's not always the cause, or it's not as simple as just the cause, right?
What's interesting about it is that the cause is not the end, it's the means. The cause provides a means, a wonderful means to satisfy one's quest for significance. Because what can give you more significance than dying for a cause that your community believes in, becoming a martyr, a hero? So that's a pretext. But the underlying motivation, psychologically speaking, is this quest for significance that all of us have, but it's channeled differently in the case of a Mother Teresa as opposed to Osama bin Laden, a Gandhi as opposed to your garden variety suicide bomber.
Hmm. I got it. They want to build themselves up by tearing down others, and even more usefully, if they've accepted a set of values, right, from their community, their environment, their group, or, as you've written, their network, right? Most people actually have a network. People have needs, they have networks, right? And what's the third N again?
The narratives,
The
yes.
narrative. Accepting a narrative, which of course, well, it's more than just a simple story. It actually, for many people, it becomes the main thing in their life. So, whether we're talking about the murderer in Washington or, well, frankly, a terrorist who may be out to spark a revolution if he possibly could, chances are, and when you investigate the need, you almost establish that. Most humans have a need for their life to matter, to put themselves on the map, to be more important and recognized. So the narrative and the network, what order should we look at?
Well, let's look at the narrative first. The narrative is the kind of ideology, a worldview that suggests that in this particular case, murder and violence are appropriate and worthy. Uh, in this particular case, the narrative is that the Jews are doing injustice to the Palestinians, and Palestinians need to be avenged. The Jews need to be punished. That kind of narrative that pervades the media, that pervades the dialogue, that causes the world to turn away from Israel, is a very powerful narrative to which that particular individual subscribed, apparently, as do masses of students on campuses and so forth. And that narrative is, because it's embraced by a large community, left-leaning community, campus communities, communities around the world, provides the basis for taking action on behalf of that narrative, doing whatever the narrative demands, the dictates of the narrative, and thereby, hopefully, gaining significance, gaining notoriety, gaining status in the eyes of the community that subscribes to the narrative.
Right. And we're calling the community the network. So we have the need, we have the narrative, we have the network. And to be clear, the person who takes action to build himself or herself up didn't necessarily meet the network, right? Especially these days, for years now, of course, it could be an online network, quite anonymous, right? Things that the person saw or read online and feeling, what would you say? I want to be part of that and I want to be big in that.
Yes, just the awareness of the network. Sometimes it's imaginary network. For example, Anders Breivik that killed 70 people on the island of Utoya in Norway assumed that he's member of Knights Templar, that there was a network that would approve of him, that would cherish him, would adulate him, and so on and so forth. So the network could be a face-to-face network. For example, the urban terrorists of the 1970s and 80s, the Bader-Meinhof, the Brigade Rosse, the ETA, they needed face-to-face network because they were so deviant from the mainstream society. But these days, with the social media, you can find your echo chambers, your network anywhere on the internet, and therefore you do not need to meet your supporters face to face. You can just meet them online or even assume, knowing what the people think, that doing an act against the alleged enemy would meet with widespread approval and would turn you into a figure of worth and status.
Now, Professor Kruglanski, Arie, let's talk about anti-Semitism from at least two angles. One, I want to know, broadly speaking, even historically for centuries, like why do they all hate us? Why do they pick on the Jews? And then we'll go to the more specific instance since October 7th, when to most of us, Israel was victimized, Israelis were massacred, Israelis were taken as hostages, and yet there was an upsurge of hatred toward Jews in Israel. So, first, over the centuries, what's your reading on that? What's anti Semitism from a significance point of view?
Well, as we said, to maintain your significance, you very often need somebody to put down. Different historical periods saw different groups of people being put down. The colonial era had seen colonialized people put down, regarded as natives, as children, as half-wits. The eugenics theory suggested that certain
Right.
races are inferior, and then all that to elevate the white man's conception of themselves and also allow economic exploitation that added to the glamour and the riches of the white communities. The Jews somehow managed to be the ultimate other, the ultimate entity, the ultimate social entity to put down. It started in ancient Egypt about 700 years before Christ, where the Jews were accused of collaborating with the Persians. They received special favor from the Persian kings, and that aroused the ire of the Egyptians. And of course, the story of Exodus is portraying the Egyptians in a negative light. So that was the beginning of portraying the Jews as somebody to be down on. Of
Well,
course,
if I may ask, Arya, does almost every society psychologically require somebody to put down? I mean, is it often an element in a society that who knows might even be admirable, might even accomplish things, feeds its own people, and yet part of the story, if you examine it, is they put down somebody.
absolutely. The caste system in India, the great chain of being in the UK and in Europe, there's always somebody that is being put down. And the Jews were from the Egyptian times onward. Of course, then Christianity was competing with Judaism about the divine revelation, and the fact that the Jews did not make their religion publicly available. They kept it to themselves as the chosen people. And finally, they betrayed the one popularizer of monotheism, Jesus. That all added up. And over the centuries, the Jews became the pariah for, for, for the different monotheistic religion, for Christianity, for Islam. And that attitude toward the Jews was ingrained in the culture. You see it in Shakespeare, you see it in Bach, you see it in the poems of T.S. Eliot. It's just so much in the DNA of many of the European or Islamic societies that it is very easily to activate it, as it was activated by the recent Gaza events, and lead to the kind of selectivity of attitudes that we see now. For example, Putin invaded Ukraine. He killed about 10 times, if not more, civilians that the Israelis did in Gaza. I'm not excusing the slaughter of civilians by any stretch of the imagination, but there's no protest against Putin. There's no animus in campuses. There's no murders of people on behalf of the Ukrainians. And there is one against the Jews. And I think that that's in large part because of that activation of this DNA-based anti-Semitism that is there dormant across the world.
Wow, in the DNA. And since we have enough time, I'm going to ask you about that for a second, because, of course, your specialty is psychology and what motivates people. Did you literally mean it's in the DNA? Or is it, habitual generation after generation?
It's not in the physical DNA, but it's a fundamental aspect of the cultural attitudes. Somehow you get it with the literature, with the music, with whatever you're exposed to. There is that place for the Jew that is despicable, and the stereotype is negative, and whether it's a rich Jew or a poor Jew, the negative aspect is there, and somehow it seeps in.
And when it comes to group behavior, and mind you, viewers, in our book, which I won't incessantly plug, but it is something different, we do write about styles of parenting and family styles. And the book's not overwhelmingly Jewish in its content, but we do mention the prototypical Jewish parents, etc. And I wanted to ask, in view of what you've been talking about, the history that has psychology woven into it, how did it affect Jewish people over the centuries to be hated and despised? In many countries and many eras, we actually were successful, well educated, we might be close to the sovereign, and yet resented by others. How did it psychologically affect us, and it affect our DNA?
It affected our ability to survive and our ability to thrive. But I think that this is a very annoying aspect to others. That we would not lie down, we would not be put down. You try to squelch us, and we rise, and that creates a cognitive dissonance, because we are supposed to be despicable. We are supposed to accept our smallness, our shame, our chagrin, and we don't. And that creates a motivation to finally put us down, these chosen people.
Wow.
That should be the
Wow.
place. We refuse to accept it, and we rise to the top in science, in technology, in the arts, and now Israel. And for many people, it's somehow dissonant with the way things should be, with
Well,
with the great chain of being. We
yeah,
should
and we
now.
can't. Yeah, no, I have that point. And of course, it doesn't suffice to say only a few words about the Holocaust, about the rise of Hitler, and as he fueled his own political rise in Germany in the 1930s, he had someone who had to be blamed for the outcome of World War One and the humiliation for Germany of the Versailles Treaty that ended World War One, and perhaps no surprise that in Weimar Republic of Germany and total poverty, no progress at all. So a dictator rises, and he blames the Jews, but of course, it had to have the history, as you said, of many in the church blaming us for killing Jesus, and right, it had to, or the bankers and the money and blaming us for everything. Uh, and I have to point out individually, because it's also early in our book, Arie, that you're a survivor of that period, right? You were in Łódź, Poland, and the Nazis were there. And you and your parents survived. You know, tell as much or as little as you want, but I think you witnessed, even as a little boy, a couple of things. As you wrote, your parents showering you with significance, but the enemy, the invader, the Nazis, right, considered Jews to have zero significance and tried to wipe you out.
That was
That left a mark.
that left a mark that stimulated my interest in issues of significance, because I had this great discrepancy. On the one hand, I was an only child. At that time, it was not a very good idea to have children to begin with, but I was born anyway. The only child in the family, cherished by aunts and uncles and grandparents. And on the other hand, I was acutely aware that outside of home, I'm in mortal danger. I do not matter at all. Other children were being caught in Kinderaktion and sent off to concentration camps. I was I was very little, but I was aware of this danger that surrounds this existential danger. So that created that puzzle for me. You know what significance is, what mattering is, and how dependent it is on the context, on the network, on your people versus other people that view you in an entirely different way.
Well, let's consider that I believe your next step, would it have been with both your parents, was to go to British ruled Palestine?
Uh, we immigrated to Israel in 1950, so
Ah,
2 years after the state was established.
I see. Okay, so Israel itself represents something. Again, let's think about the social psychology of the Jewish people having their own sovereign state for the first time since what we'll call the time of the Bible, right? So, as a people, right, that's significance restored.
Absolutely. What's interesting about it that the same motivation for significance that affects you and I every single day of our lives also translates into events of a macro level scale, like establishment of states. Establishment of the state of Israel was in order to elevate our sense of significance through having a sovereign state, a nation among nations, being proud of our heritage, of our culture, of our ethnicity, of our religion. For the first time, this happened after thousands of years in exile and being a despised minority. So, unfortunately, the Palestinian Arabs also saw this opportunity for nationhood. They too were despised, were treated as second degree or third degree citizens in the 400 years of Ottoman domination. And the rising Arab nationalism lifted them up and gave them the hope of becoming a nation. And the tragedy, of course, is that it was in the same place of land. You cannot have a nation without having sovereignty over land. And that was the beginning of the great intractable conflict that we have seen since, that resulted in such massive violence on both sides, and to which we do not quite see the end as yet.
Yeah, now keep in mind, dear viewers, we're not trying to explain all the politics and events from on a strategic level, but rather the psychology behind it. So we don't need to receive complaints that the Palestinian leaders of the time in 47 and 48 turned down the deal the UN offered both people's states. Broadly speaking, the Arab side said no. The Jews said, we have our own country, hooray, and survive. Oh, I guess I'm getting into the strategy and the history. Arie, you know even better than I. We both know, and our viewers know. I got it. But we're going into the psychology that not everyone realizes. So let us accept that Israel as a country was a success. It developed the ability to defend itself. The economy became strong. We all know that. And well, we'll skip ahead to two things. One is endangered by the neighboring countries in 1967. The Six-Day War broke out. Israel was spectacularly successful and captured land, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, the Sinai as well. So where were there a lot of people? Palestinian Arabs, mostly the West Bank, also in Gaza, a lot of people. So I think, help me with the psychology of this, because the Jews, the government of Israel, became, like it or not, the administrators, the overlords. What are you going to say? The security masters, almost deciding how much authority Palestinian Arabs could have. And obviously, the Palestinians became frustrated and turned to hijacking airplanes, murdering 11 Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics, and more. It turned to violence. Tell us the psychology of how, in that interaction, Jews were now the governors, the overlords, because of their victory in 1967.
You know, the quest for significance can be activated in one of two ways. One is through a loss of significance, humiliation, and the other one is through an opportunity to gain significance. And after the spectacular victory of the 6 Days War, the Jews, the Israeli Jews, all of a sudden saw an opportunity for greatness, for conquests, for expanding, a greater Israel, expanding the boundaries of Israel, ruling over the territories in Gaza, in the West Bank. And many people got a strong appetite for that enhancement of Israel. And that kept on with every success of the Israelis to squelch opposition to
Well, that leads to defeat, as you said, terrorists and Palestinian Arabs who weren't going to, shall we say, play along. But on the other side, right, the loss of significance. Palestinian Arabs may have made that mistake, not accepting the deal in the late 40s, right? But by 67, basically no fault of their own, right? Jordan joined the war against Israel and lost the entire West Bank. And those Arabs had to live under Israeli military governors. Loss of significance for the Arab residents.
right, right. And what's interesting that whenever the Arabs, the Palestinians had some kind of success, like Intifada, the first Intifada, motivated them to engage in conversations with the Israelis, and that led finally to the Oslo Accords of 1993. So, once you have some significance, you're more willing to sit down and compromise. When you have no significance at all, the only option you have is violence. The same thing happened, by the way, with Egypt. After the Egyptians crossed the canal in the 1993 Yom Kippur War, they were ready, Sadat was ready to make peace with Israel. So from the position of strength, when you do not need so much significance because you already have some significance, you're willing to negotiate, to compromise, to find alternative ways, not as destructive, not as violent to significance. So there was on the one hand the appetite of Israelis to gain more significance. On the other hand, the Arab frustration with the occupation, with the control of the West Bank and Gaza, and terrorism, and that dynamic led to first the Oslo Agreement that did not quite succeed, and then to the subsequent developments that we are witnessing now of mounting spiral of violence that seems to be endless.
Sure. Sure, and we'll get to October 7th and the Gaza war, but again, let's continue with the background more than a little bit, because would you agree, in the Middle East, to gain some significance, to try to feel more like an equal and ready to negotiate, in the Middle East, it usually is the use of force, right? As you said, President Sadat of Egypt, he sent his army across the Suez Canal and grabbed part of the Sinai, and that was getting some dignity back. The Intifada, again, from a Jewish Israeli point of view, terrible, right? Suicide bombings of buses, restaurants, terrible. But for Palestinian activists, oh, that at least put us on the map. And I already mentioned the Munich Olympics massacre. So a lot of force and bloodshed in the Middle East in order to get to the possibility of talking. I've got that right?
Yes, absolutely. And
Yeah.
what people do not always realize that all that violence is a way of humiliating the enemy, is a way of gaining significance at the expense of the enemy. Uh,
Wow.
you
Okay,
know,
so let's go to the most extreme thing in our recent past. We're never going to forget it, right? Saturday, October 7th, 2023. And frankly, Israel didn't guard its border well enough, and Hamas got through. Thousands of attackers went into Israel and killed more than 1,200 people, kidnapped 250, massacres. And the Israelis point out, and historians do, right? The most victims in one day for the Jewish people, the biggest number since the Holocaust. What an awful day. So, psychological analysis. What was Hamas? We're putting aside the strategy of trying to block peace initiatives with Saudi Arabia. Psychologically, what was Hamas trying to do?
Psychologically, it was a monumental humiliation to the state of Israel, a true tragic in the Greek, philosophy sense, fall from greatness. The Mossad, the Israeli intelligence, the Israeli army, reputed to be one of the best in the world, all failed to protect Israeli women that were raped, Israeli children, Israeli babies. What greater humiliation can there be? And sometimes people wonder, why did the Palestinians rejoice at this slaughter, this terrible massacre? Well, they rejoiced because it was a score. It was in the game of significance. This was a great defeat of their enemy. This was a great humiliation. And in response to that humiliation, Israel launched the Gaza war. And again, this is about humiliating Hamas, about eliminating Hamas. It's not, people say, there's no logic to the war, there's no end to the war. The logic is psychological, to eliminate Hamas, to show that entity that produced that humongous humiliation on the Jewish people will not stand, and they will pay the ultimate price. They will be eliminated. This is the psychological rationale. It's not the arrangements, it's not the end of some kind of management of Gaza. It's about defeating the entity responsible for that monumental blow to Israeli sense of significance.
Now, I think you'd agree that is subtly different from what people who are military strategists talk about, that it's revenge, simple revenge, find out who attacked you and wipe them out so they can't attack you again. Yeah, that sounds military strategy, could be. And it's also somewhat divorced from, I'm now going to make sure that they can never have an independent state because they'll attack us again. I got it, but there's psychology underlying even those statements, right? They dealt us such a humiliating blow. Obviously, they elevated themselves. Hamas was able to accomplish something. And
Yes.
so, in this psychological battle, right, the Jewish side, the Israeli side, we have to humiliate them. And the Gaza war is that, right? I mean, so many neighborhoods are being flattened. Yeah, people are
Yes.
being killed, of course.
Yes, it's terrible. The price in human life is terrible, but the psychology of it is to humiliate Hamas, to eradicate Hamas, to eliminate its leaders, to show that Israel can avenge. Vengeance, by the way, is an ultimate sense of restoring your significance after it was humiliated. Uh, and there is a strategic wisdom in that showing to the Palestinians that violence does not pay is one way of perhaps opening the window for an alternative way of gaining significance. But that would require in victory magnanimity. I'm not sure that the Israelis are quite ready to be magnanimous, because after defeating Hamas, were they to be magnanimous? Were they serious about negotiating a two-state solution? That would have been maybe an opportune moment to give the Palestinians the respect and the consideration, and being willing to concede territory to allow a formation of a viable state. That would be, in my wishful dreams, that would have been the case of the consequence of defeating Hamas and showing that violence does not pay. By the way, in my studies of the fail of radical movements, it was always after their defeat. After their defeat, after the Egyptian Gamma Islamiyah and Al Jihad were defeated, their leaders were in jail, their weapons were confiscated, then they turned around and discovered that Quran is against violence. In my work in Sri Lanka, the Tamil Tigers, once they were defeated, the radicalization occurred. So, there is a way of showing that violence is not the way to significance, it's the way to shame and ignominy. That can open an opportunity for an alternative.
I remember we wrote about the Sri Lanka example, but there's that key word, alternative, which could come to bear in your pie in the sky, optimism about Gaza, what could occur. Because again, with the former so-called terrorists in Sri Lanka, they were offered other ways to have dignity, self-respect. Their community was not being mashed into the ground, but
Yes.
showing violence doesn't work. But playing along and studying and taking jobs and contributing, it can. Now, that's why you could imagine, we'll bring in a little bit of strategy in politics, that if Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, rich Arab countries, help rebuild Gaza, with some Marshall Plan kind of thinking, like after World War II, that perhaps another way for Palestinians to feel significance
with
could be demonstrated.
with Israel participating in that process and making concessions to allow the establishment of a Palestinian state. I think that, in my wishful optimism, that would be the ultimate solution. You mentioned the Marshall Plan. There is an interesting comparison between what happened after First World War that you mentioned, that there was a total humiliation of Germany in the Versailles Treaty of 1919, and that led to the rise of Hitler and to the Second World War. By comparison, after the defeat of Germany and the Axis, Italy and Japan, after the Second World War, the United States behaved with magnanimity. It forged the Marshall Plan for the development of Europe in Germany, and it turned former deadly enemy into allies. Germany became a liberal democracy, one of America's staunchest allies, and so did Japan, and so forth. So, that juxtaposition of what happened in the two wars gives you, some food for thought.
Right. And just so you know, we are aware it's not the same because the US was not fighting for territory with Germany or Italy or Japan, whereas the Israelis and the Palestinians want the same land. But still, we're trying to be a little optimistic, but let's bring it on home. And we'll definitely speak in a moment about your continued inquiry into roots of anti-Semitism and how it's being expressed now. But let's turn to October 8th, literally the day after so many Israelis were massacred and kidnapped. There were demonstrations in American cities, other cities in the Western world, that were against Israel. Manifestos released by, we think of them as leftist groups, right, condemning Israel for everything that happened yesterday. It was incredible. That had to be a form of anti Semitism. That had to be the old psychological DNA, don't you think?
Well, I think that's part of it, definitely. But I think there is another part of it and that's siding with the underdog. You know, seeing the Palestinian as the suffering entity, suffering people for years and years under Israeli occupation, the checkpoints, the injustice, the suffering of the Palestinians. That in and of itself allows people to feel significant by supporting them. It kind of,
Mm.
identifying with the underdog, doing things in favor of the underdog makes you significant.
Oh, you're very noble, right? And you want to be part of the noble people who actually take action.
Exactly.
One hopes, of course, short of violence. You, of course, teach at the University of Maryland. We don't have to go into the details because we all know on many campuses the issue became protesters come, they set up an encampment, they block other people, they seem to be targeting Jews. Now, I don't know if it's a psychological issue to you. This confusion, this blurring between Jews and Zionists, between Jews and Israel, it all became blurred, and so it sure looked like anti-Semitism to me.
Well, yes, because people do not really know the history, do not know that Zionism is basically establishing a home for the Jewish people that were homeless for millennia. So they see Zionism as a kind of colonializing, imperialistic entity that is suppressing, is exploiting, is humiliating the natives, Arabs, the Palestinians, and that simplistic schema gives rise to what we see. That we are the colonizers, we are the occupiers, they are the suffering native people who are treated unfairly with injustice, and that kind of idea. To be on the side of the suffering victim gives you an opportunity to be a hero, to be a good person, to be worthy. And we have research showing that the greatest American students' desire for significance, the more they support the Palestinian cause. There is a very strong and significant correlation. So that narrative of siding with the underdog against the power that be gives people significance, and this is an opportunity.
Okay, for those who wondered why they automatically sided against Israel, let's put it into your framework, right? Arie Kruglanski's three N's. The need, we agreed. Everyone has a need for significance, dignity, feel important, I'm doing the right thing. Then we have the narrative and the networks. So it seems to me the network, of course, existed, many groups that have been campaigning against Israel for years. But it seems to me the narrative that supporters of Israel have been inundated. They lost the argument, at least in most of the campuses and elite universities, right? There are competing narratives,
Yeah,
yet somehow the anti-Israel narrative seems to have won. And the young people, they need the three N's: needs,
that's right.
narratives, networks.
That's right. The psychology of it is a really slanted, biased against Israel. Israel, is the powerful technological nation. The Palestinians are poor people, farmers with olive groves and donkeys, and they are exploited. In that kind of juxtaposition, the Israeli side has very people blame Israeli ability to explain, but I think the psychological rationale for why the anti-Israeli side has the upper hand is very, very clear. This
Now, yeah. Now,
opportunity
now
for,
again,
yeah.
thank you. Now, again, dear viewers, our book is not just about Jews or the Middle East. It's an element. Our book even includes why you fall in love with the person you fall in love with, right? You give significance. It's reflected back upon you. And also, dare I say it, Arya, some advice, right? To get to know yourself. What do you value? What you think significance is? And look at all the people around you. Get to know the people in your family. Yes, the person you love, person who hopefully loves you back, the people at work, at school, and give them a measure of what's important to them. And you'll probably get some of that significance reflected back on you. It could be a win-win, right? I think that's good.
Absolutely.
I absolutely do want to know, before we turn to Suzanne with questions from the viewers, I want to know what is your further research on anti-Semitism in the significance framework?
Well, we're now trying to collect all the empirical research that we can find about anti-Semitism because it's been an unprecedented wave of anti-Semitism, and there's a lot of work being done across the social sciences. So we are just gathering the data and trying to understand it from our perspective. But the data speak for themselves, and we are very curious to see what people have been discovering.
Knowing you, a journal will be published, yes?
Yes. It's actually a journal that is headed by a German colleague, Daniel Köhler, German on radicalization. So we see anti-Semitism as a form of radicalization. Radicalization is the topic that I've been very interested in from times immemorial.
And just a brief mention, and maybe you just want to fill it in for a few seconds, why Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine? What was he making up for? And then later, why did Donald Trump get elected twice? Ooh, that's a hot one. So briefly, Vladimir Putin.
Well, again, the same motivation that motivates each one of us motivates historical events like the invasion of Ukraine, like the election of Trump. Putin regarded the demise of the Soviet Union the greatest calamity of the 20th century. He wanted to restore the superpower status, the Russian Empire, his own status as the new Peter the Great. It's all about significance. So, these monumental events that chart the course of history have their root in the human nature, in this quest for significance. The idea of making America great again, it's about making Americans great again. People who feel left behind by globalization, threatened by immigration, threatened by the refugee crisis. The promise is to make them feel great again. I mean, the words speak for themselves. It's all about significance and how powerful it is.
Well, Suzanne Borden, I hope some questions have come in because, as we say, this basic human motivation makes the world go round. Suzanne.
Thank you both for that really great conversation. The first question is, given the pervasiveness of the quest to promote oneself, must it always be at the expense of others? And if not, how then would this quest be fulfilled?
It very often is. It's the easiest thing to do, to put others down. Violence is a primordial means to gain your significance, but it doesn't have to be. There are other ways. There are pro-social ways. Significance is derived from values, and the values can differ. The values can be enhancing your own group at the expense of other groups, or it can be promoting humanity. The work of Mother Teresa, great humanitarians like Gandhi, like Mandela, like other people who are Martin Luther King, who are promoting values of equality, of inclusiveness. These also give you significance. So there is the interesting thing about the quest for significance is that it allows for alternatives. It's true that the put down alternative comes very quickly to mind and it's very difficult to compete with, but it can be replaced. And that's the hope of humanity, to replace, because the quest for significance is there, it's fixed, it's part of our nature. But replacing pro-social, constructive ways for destructive, violent ways is what gives us hope.
Yeah, that's necessary. And I'll just add, of course, you can have a life where you donate to charity and you help your community, and putting down other people does not have to be part of the picture. And you'll feel great about yourself because it's one of the values that you have embraced from your network and the narrative that you accepted through your life. It doesn't have to include putting down other people.
It does not have to.
Turning back to college campuses, as we all know, it really, the protests and all swept pretty quickly through campus last year and continued this year. I think a lot of your explanation, the psychology behind it, students coming to campus first time on their own, most say they never knew anything about what was happening in Israel and in Gaza prior to coming to campus. And so this search for significance makes a lot of sense. And the question that a lot of people have, a lot of parents have, especially this happened with a lot of students who were Jewish as well, is there is there a way to change, or is there, as people grow and students mature, will they ever change their views, and their own quest for significance, or have they kind of hardwired their feelings, and we're going to see the implications of this for years and years and years to come?
Well, I think both are true. It's not fixed forever. The human mind is malleable. If people change their network, for example, to a network that is subscribing to a different worldview, they will change as well in order to be accepted, in order to have significance. Uh, but I think that unless these views are challenged, unless these views are ones that cease to deliver significance, they will remain. So, it's not necessarily fixed, but it's likely to remain until and unless it's challenged by arguments, by alternative views that are more constructive. For example, a peaceful negotiation, a peaceful solution that allows both the Jews and the Palestinians to have significance. To understand that, it's not elimination of one side, because that is destructive and immoral, but rather finding ways of a win-win solution to the problem. That's what needs to happen. And right now, the winds are blowing into a total condemnation of Israel, without understanding that it also has a claim, it also has a reason for its actions.
Now, Arie, let me ask you, because you know Israeli society so well, if Israel feels it is being condemned unfairly everywhere, what kind of actions does that probably motivate on the part of Israeli leaders? Sure, they include right-wing ministers who want to keep the West Bank forever and maybe settle Gaza and don't like or trust Arabs. I mean, that's part of the background. But again, psychologically, if Israel feels it's always condemned and no one listens, why do we even give speeches at the UN? What sort of actions does it likely provoke?
Well, the Israeli society, as you know, is very divided, as is American society. Half of the Israeli society would end the war yesterday, and would, very much care about what the world is thinking of Israel. These are the people who are educated, who participate in affairs of the world, who are at ease with travel, who speak different languages. But there is another part of Israel that is not of that ilk, that does not feel comfortable with the world at large. It feels comfortable in their Israeli nationalistic skin, and they, frankly, do not care much about what the world thinks. And the question is, to what extent Israeli leaders can amass sufficient support for either view. To the extent that the international view would prevail, Israel will be open to a conversation. But to the extent that the alternative views will have the political power, then you can see intransigence, you can see a kind of Masada mentality, siege mentality, in which the world views and condemnations do not really matter, and Israel is going to do what it would do.
A choice of two directions. Suzanne, is there a chance that if we have a couple of minutes, that's all I think it would
Yeah,
take
I think we
to
got.
talk about
Oh, go ahead.
love, to talk about love. I do think that when my friend Arie has thought about the significance factor in how you fall in love, it's not calculated, but it just happens. Tell me about falling in love.
Well, love is not just a matter of chemistry, it's not a matter of magic, it's a matter of significance. You fall in love with somebody who you respect, who has value. Uh, So that's one factor. The value can derive from their good looks, from their smarts, from their status, from their power, but they have value in your eyes. And the second component, they have to appreciate you. So if somebody of value appreciates you, you get significance from them. And because you value their merit, you give them significance. So it's a kind of mutual significance giving society. That's what love is all about. And we have now ample empirical research to show that new theory of love. So significance is not only about violence, it's also about love. These are two servants of the same governor, the human quest for significance.
Thank you.
Suzanne?
And as we wrap up, someone asked, how can one find significance in a mind that's divided by different beliefs? Also, is it possible to let confusion be a teacher?
Confusion.
And by the way, before you even answer, another book plug just for you, a solo book by Professor Arie Kruglanski is called Uncertain, right? A lot of people fear uncertainty, but if you think about it, in an uncertain situation, the sky's the limit. You might do great. I think that's what your book says. But in this case, something else, confusion.
Confusion. Well, confusion is uncertainty, and uncertainty usually leads to exploration. And the exploration, there is a myth that the greatest fear that humans know is the fear of the unknown. But that's not true. Some people embrace the unknown. So it's a question of seeing in the unknown, embracing the unknown. As Emmanuel Ram used to say, let no crisis go to waste. Let no confusion goes to waste, I say. Let no uncertainty goes to waste. Explore the possibilities. Once there is confusion, there's an opportunity to discover alternative ways, alternative possibilities. So let's embrace uncertainty and find the ways to turn it into a positive kind of thing.
Some of that was Rahm Emanuel. Suzanne?
Well, thank you both, Dr. Kruglanski and Dan Raviv. I want to thank the audience for joining us. I put a link in the chat. The book is called The Quest for Significance. We will have an email go out that will also contain the link and a link to this program. Please go to momentmag.com where you can register for our upcoming programs. Again, thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You.